All right, well, good morning. Hey, can somebody say, finally? Okay, good. So if maybe you're visiting today, you're a guest, or you've been coming for the last few weeks, you might be thinking, who's this guy, right? I happen to be the lead pastor here. My name's Brandon, so nice to meet you. I've been on hiatus for about 12 weeks. My wife and I, we took a sabbatical starting back toward the end of March, and we've been here 10 years, celebrated 10 years in March. And we found out that, sabbatical, a time of rest and just sort of to break away and to refocus and to recenter ourselves and our marriage, it was long overdue. I mean, it really was, right? There were some circumstances surrounding why we sort of decided to take this time when we did, but I think everything is God ordained and God planned, and He was saying, you need to break away from this. You need to step away before you wear yourself out. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through this message, but I just wanted to say before I get into what I want to talk about today, just how good it feels to be back. I mean, just to be with you guys. There is no other place on this planet on Sunday morning that I would rather be than New Life Church. Listen, we've been to all kinds of churches, like from really small churches to really big, from 50 to 20,000 over the last 10 to 12 weeks, and there's nothing like right here. There's nothing like what God's going on, He's doing here. If you don't believe it, if you don't believe it, just go somewhere else for a few weeks, try a few places out. I promise you're going to be back. You just will. You will be back because what God is doing here is special. And we have missed you dearly. I wanted to say to everybody, you gave us the space that we needed to just sort of rest and enjoy ourselves and, enjoy our family. But you sent texts, you sent emails, cards. We got a few phone calls. Some of you sent some gift cards, and we're really thankful for you, right? Those were awesome. We appreciate that. No, it's just the support we have received from our church has just been absolutely incredible. It's indescribable, and there's no way for us to really express how much we appreciate all the love and all the support. And just being welcomed back today has just been an incredible experience. It's felt so good, to be here today. Because I know it's tough on everybody. It's tough on us. And, I want to say I failed to do this in the first service, so guys, please forgive me. But I wanted to say just a huge, huge thank you to the staff, the leadership, the board here at the church for keeping things from running off the rails, so to speak. It's been, those guys have worked tirelessly. They've picked up extra loads and responsibilities. And they've done a great job, and I just appreciate them so much and thank them. But it's been a learning process, and God's been sort of teaching me and Jessica and our family some things over the last 12 weeks. I mean, listen, our 13-year wedding anniversary, March the 20th, we celebrated, get this was awesome, we celebrated in the office of a marriage counselor. Yes! Yeah, just what you wanted to do, right? To celebrate 13 years of marriage. You're sitting in counseling. You're thinking, dang, man, y'all are messed up. Here's the truth about it. We're not any more messed up than you. I mean, come on, let's just be real. All right? Here's what I figured out. Because when we started discussing, now nobody made us go to counseling. All right, let's just clear the air. Nobody made us. It wasn't like a forced thing. We was like, this is something we think we might need to do. We talked about that, and I went, but like most men, most husbands, I went hesitantly, reluctantly. I'm thinking, there's some things we need to work on. We need to clear the air and, put some priorities back in order, but we don't need counseling. I counsel people. I know who needs counseling. And we're not it. So we went, right? We went, and when we left, I told Jessica, I said, well, here's what I think about that. We are all jacked up people, and everybody needs counseling. So my advice to you, if you don't hear anything else from this message today, is tomorrow morning, call a counselor and set up an appointment for yourself, for your marriage. I don't care if you've been married 5 months or 50 years. Like, you need it. Trust me. We all need somebody that we can talk to in confidence and who can give us some outside perspective. It was great, man. We met with our counselors for about 8 to 10 weeks, and they really helped us work through some of the challenges that, all marriages experience, but especially pastoral marriages, those who are in the ministry together. So it's been absolutely phenomenal. But more than that, God's just really been doing some things in our life and really been teaching us. And that's what you want. Man, when God begins to teach you lessons, when you quiet yourself and you quiet your life enough to hear the voice of God and Him to point out some things that you need to work on or that you need to change, man, that's where things really begin to click on all cylinders. There's something that God's been dealing with me here over these past several weeks is leadership. Leadership. Leadership in the home, leadership in the church, leadership in the workplace, leadership wherever you find yourself. And I take leadership seriously. And over the past several years, I felt as if, I'm doing the best I can. Because my greatest desire is to be the husband, to be the father, to be the pastor, to be the leader that God called me and created me to do. And with the experience and the knowledge that I've had up until this point, I felt as if I was doing the best job I knew I could do, right? I was trying as hard as I could do. But here's the truth. We all have those moments. You sort of know what I'm talking about. Now, some of us, moments turn into seasons, and seasons into years, and years into a lifetime. But we all at least have some of those moments in life where we just sort of rest back, say, I'm gonna put it on cruise control. We get lazy, we get complacent, whatever you want to call it, however you want to label it, we get that way at times. And I believe for us, that those moments that have a tendency sometimes to turn into seasons is what the enemy tried to exploit in our life, in my ministry, in this church, in the marriage. Those moments when we just say, well, let's just back off. Let's just let it ride. Let's do enough to say we've done something, right? Now, let's just be honest. I've missed 12 weeks. I'm just trying to be real with you. We do that. And so, for God to get me to realize that couldn't go on indefinitely, something had to change. And for something to change, everything had to stop. That was tough. Tough. One of the toughest things that I've done in my adult life, to step away from what I know in my knower. Like, you know where that is, right? To step away from what I know God called me to do, what He created me to do. To just step away, to walk. It was difficult. And the first week, I knew there was going to be a lot of adjustment. Like, I knew that going in. But the first week, I thought, 11 more weeks of this, and I'm going to go insane. I mean, literally. They're going to have to put me in a nut house. Because I had to adjust, really, to doing a whole lot of nothing. And I don't do nothing well. I don't just sit around and just be, right? That's not me. I live life, I work, pedal to the metal. Go all the time, hard as you can go, till you got no more go. That's it. That's the way I work. And what I didn't realize, this has become sort of one of my sort of theme songs, favorite songs now. What I didn't realize is I was the first line in the Jason Aldean song, pedal to the metal on downhill slide. Like, y'all heard that, right? You got any country fans? Yeah. So, okay. I thought we were still in the South, right? Y'all hadn't up and changed, moved on me or something. But you get that way, man. You just hammer that thing down without realizing that you can't do that forever. You can't live at that speed forever. And people ain't going with you either. You know what I'm saying? And so what God had to do was teach me the purpose and the priority of rest. I'm going to talk about that a little more in depth next week as we hit on the 10 Commandments. But the purpose and priority of rest. But even before he could do that, he had to just get me to stop. And the tool, the instrument of choice at this moment in my life was pain. Some things have to hurt before you stop. You know, to get you to slow up a little bit. And so this was a painful time for me and for Jessica, for our family, and it was a painful time for our church. And it hurt, like I said, not to be here. Whether I was preaching or not, it just hurt not to be here. We love you guys. And absolutely are convinced that you love us. So it hurt not to be here. Like we've got to do some of the things we've never done before. We've gone to places, we never in our entire marriage have we been able to say, why don't we just up and go, there this week? We've never been able to do that because we've always been tied to the church, to something that's going on. We couldn't leave. But there was those times where we're just like, why don't we just go somewhere? Why don't we just do this? Why don't we do that? For the first time ever, and I've preached this from the stage, just never practiced it. So again, I'm just trying to be honest with you. For the first time ever, since we've had children, and she'll be 7 years old this year. For the first time ever, during this 12 weeks, we went out of town without taking them with us. Now that was scary. We didn't know how that was going to work out, but we left them and hoped that they would be there and, everything's going to be okay when we got back. It was one of the most incredible weekends that her and I have had together in a long time. Man, God did some things. It was just awesome. So as I began to adjust and sort of acclimate to this time off, Mondays through Saturdays, I really began to enjoy those. I get up on Monday morning, I didn't really have anywhere to go. I didn't have an appointment. Nobody was calling, saying, hey, can you come meet me for whatever? And usually, when somebody calls and wants to meet with the pastor, it's never good. Nobody did that. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Mondays through Saturday were great. Sunday morning sucked. Just going to be straight up. Because we get up on Sunday morning, and there was somewhere I wanted to go, but I couldn't. We sent our girls, and then Jessica and I would hop in the car and drive, wherever. Sometimes I wouldn't make up our minds. I wouldn't make up the decision of where we was going to go to church that day until Sunday morning, Saturday night, Sunday morning. Because there was nowhere else I wanted to go but New Life Church. And one of the most painful things was to ride by this road and to know you guys were here and that we couldn't be. Man, it's like my truck just wanted to pull in, but it's like we fought it back on the road. And we went to some incredible churches. Small churches, large churches. There's just no place like this. God's doing something special here, and I hope that you realize it. I hope that you see it. I heard a quote last night. Jessica was watching something on TV, and I just overheard this. It was from Marilyn Monroe, of all people. No matter what you think about her. She said, sometimes good things have to fall apart so that better things can fall together. And I thought, dang. That's good. And that's what I see God doing in my life and in our church. Over the last 12 weeks, there's some good things that had to fall apart so that better things can fall together. And I believe right now, more than I've ever believed in my life, that the best is yet to come. I believe that with every fiber of my being. And so God just had to do some things to really begin to teach me. And one of my early questions that I had to wrestle with God, and I remember this conversation because I was washing my truck, right? Something I always, that's my routine. Saturday, wash truck, study to preach, get up Sunday morning, preach. That's my thing. So my routine began the first week. I think I washed my truck 4 times. Thinking, well, maybe somebody will let me preach the next day if I do this. That didn't happen. But one of those occasions is sort of having this ongoing conversation, and I was asking God, just like you've asked him, I know you have, why? Why is this going on? What's happening right now? I feel like I'm in this whirlwind. This ain't even my life right here. Are you serious? What's happening? What is going on? And why is this happening to me, to us? And I told God, I've done my best. I'm a good father. I'm a good husband. I'm a good pastor. I'm a good leader. So what's up with this? And this is the response that I sensed him give me. And this wasn't like an audible thing. It's like, all right, well, here's the answer. It might as well been. God spoke and he said, I know you're good, but I want you to be great. I know you're good. I want you to be great. And I thought about a quote from Tom Rainer. He's the president of Lifeway Christian bookstores and that whole organization. He said, it's a sin to be good when God's called you to be great. And I want you to hear that. Like, if you don't hear anything else, because God's called every single one of us in here, no matter who you are, whatever it is that you do and what defines you, God's called you to be great. Because as a follower of Jesus, your responsibility is to reflect Him, to be His image bearer in this world. And He's nothing less than great. It's a sin to be good when God's called you to be great. I'd settled for good. I'd settled for good, and that's what most people in this life do. I don't know if you know the name Jim Collins, but he wrote the book, Good to Great. And here's what he said, that good is the enemy of great. Few people attain great lives, in large part because it's just so easy to settle for a good life. You hear me? Few people attain a great life because it's just so easy to settle for a good life. I don't want a good life anymore. I want a great life. I don't want to be a good pastor. I want to be a great pastor. I want to be a great husband, a great father. I want to be a great leader. And this is where that ties into where we want to go today. Because over this past several weeks, we've been walking through the life and the events of a man named Moses. And find him early on in the Old Testament. And in my opinion, Moses, aside from Jesus himself, is one of, if not the greatest leader in the entire Bible. This man was absolutely incredible. And it just so happened that during my time off, that I was reading, as I was wrestling with God and all these questions and things going on in my life, I was reading through the Old Testament books of Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, all of those that are believed to have been written by Moses. And it's not because I knew that when I came back and started preaching again that this would be the series that we're in. I knew all of that, but that wasn't why I was reading. That was where my Bible daily reading plan had me at the time. And now somebody can say, well, that's just coincidence. I don't believe that. I don't believe in coincidence. I think it was divine appointment. God had something He needed to say, He needed to teach me, and He began to take me there to a place that I didn't even really know why. He just needed me there. I believe it was a divine appointment. God was on a quest, and I think He's still on. He ain't finished yet. He's on a quest to fulfill His promise in my life, this church, in my marriage, Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things, good things, bad things, everything in between, in all things, God works for the good. He works them for the good in all things for those who love Him and who are called according to His purpose. God's on a mission to fulfill that in my life, and He is in yours. But to do this, to accomplish the extraordinary task of working all things for good, He needed me to slow down, to stop. He needed to change me, to mold me, to grow me. And I'm telling you right now, that's hard to do. It's difficult to get me to change about anything. Just ask my wife. That's hard, and I believe it's difficult for God to do in your life. He had to first show me the difference between what's good and what's great. And that's why He took me here. That's why I was reading through the life and the events of Moses, because he's a great leader. And I've always believed that. I always thought that about him. Moses is a great leader. I mean, he had to have been. You imagine successfully evacuating upwards to 1 million or more Hebrew slaves from Egypt. With the entire time, the Egyptian soldiers, the entire army pursuing you. He had to be a great leader to pull off a stunt like that? Which one of us could say, well, but I did this, right? No. Moses was incredible. And so here's what I started doing. I started reading these books in the life of Moses with this question. If Moses was such a great leader, then what is it about his life, his character? What leadership traits does he have that I need to acquire? What are the things that I need to learn and to develop in my own life to be a Moses-like leader, a Moses-like father, a Moses-like husband? Right? For you, a Moses-like mother or student or whatever label describes you. Because listen, I don't want you to, I know it's Father's Day and maybe sometimes you come in here and you expect one of those, not for everybody TV dinner kind of Father's Day messages. That's not what this is going to be. Like, don't zone out on me and say, well, it's not for me. This is Father's Day, so all the fathers listen and everybody else take the week off. No. Listen to what I'm saying. Like, I worked on this for 12 weeks. I had to live this. Like, this is the best kind of message. So I'm telling you, you don't want to miss this. God's got something to say this morning. He's going to say it through His Word. I'm going to speak it with my mouth. This is real. This is for everybody because we're all leaders. Every single one of you in here are leading someone in some way. And we can all walk away with the challenge to be a Moses-like leader. And so I just wanted to sort of set up for you 6 traits that I saw in Moses. Now there could probably be 60 more that we could identify, but we don't have that kind of time. All y'all came in here and the parking lot was full because, like I said, I haven't preached but once in the last 12 weeks. I got a lot in here to get out. So 6 traits of a Moses-like leader. And this first one, I know you might think I'm just trying to be facetious and just be funny guy. I'm not. I'm being real. The first trait of a Moses-like leader, a real godly leader, is the fact that he was human. Write that down. He was human. And the reason I say that was sort of the first one that jumped out to me. And the reason it's important is because we so often want to look at men and even women in the Bible like Moses, like Paul, like David, the prophets, and we virtually deify them. Like we make gods out of them. As if they were something more than human. Well, they're not like us. They're different. They're of a different breed, right? And those kind of people really don't exist anymore except for Billy Graham. Yeah, but that's not true. Moses was human just like you and me. He was a messed up individual. I mean, there's 2 words that come to mind that prove to me that Moses was just as human as you or me. Sin and limits. I know Moses was human. He was not in the slightest bit God because he was a sinner. I'm a sinner. You're a sinner. See, one of the things that proves that is when Moses was confronted with God in this burning bush, and Eric talked about that, Moses' job at that point in his life was tending his father-in-law's sheep. Like he was way, way far away from where he grew up. Moses was born as a prince in Egypt. He born and grew up in royalty. And you have to wonder now, why, for the last 40 years of his life, so Moses, when the whole burning bush thing happens, he's around 80 years old. For the last 40 years of his life, he's lived in obscurity, tending someone else's sheep. Now that doesn't even make sense. How did he go from the palace to, the backside of nowhere, taking care of his father-in-law's sheep? Well, it's because he was a fugitive. You see, back in Egypt, 40 years earlier, he witnessed an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew slave, and he got so angry, he wanted to take matters and take justice into his own hands, and he killed the Egyptian. People saw it, word got out, and so he had to run for his life. For the next 40 years, he was always looking over his shoulder, wondering if this was going to be the day when his past caught up with him. You know, just trying to get by, keep his head low. So I know he was human. He's a murderer. He's a sinner. But what speaks to his humanity even more than that, and what I think that God began to use in his life to turn him from a good leader into a great leader, was that second word, limits. See, that's something that every single one of us have here in common, limitations. We can't be everything for everybody all the time. And I don't know who it might be, and it could be just for me, because I've had to learn this over the last few weeks. But maybe somebody else sitting here, and this is a lesson you need to learn. This is what you need to hear today. You can't be everything for everybody all the time, so stop trying. You're human. You have limits. It's impossible. And to try to do so, you're only going to wear yourself out. It's not good for you, and it's not good for them. We all have to live with human limits. And I think what separates the good from great is how we respond to those limits. Do we try to resist them, ignore them, act like as if they weren't there? Or do we embrace them and say, you know, sometimes I have to say no. Sometimes I just have to say, I can't, or I can't right now. I think Moses learned this lesson, and that's what began to move him from being a good leader to a great leader. In Exodus chapter 18, I want you to go there with me, is where this began to happen. He got a visit from his father-in-law. He had already submitted to the call of God in his life. They have made their successful evacuation and escape from Egypt. And they're beginning this journey toward the promised land, a land that God was giving his people. And now keep in mind that Moses is leading not a few hundred or not a few thousand, but hundreds of thousands of people. Some scholars estimate up to 1 million or more people fled from Egypt. And his father-in-law, he comes and he visits him. And they spend probably that first day just catching up, you know, talking about good times back on the farm. And, you know, Moses, he's asking about some of his favorite pet sheep. And, you know, Jethro's like, nah, everything's good, man. I found somebody, I hired a young kid that needed a job, and he's taking great care of the sheep. You know, how's the weather out here in the desert, right? You know, it's a little warm out here. They're just doing that kind of small talk. And verse 13, it says that the next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people. And they stood around him from morning till evening. Now again, picture this. How many people are we talking about? Not a handful. Thousands and thousands of people standing around, waiting on their turn to talk to Moses. From sunup to sundown, all he did was listen to people's problems. Drama, you know. When his father-in-law, verse 14, saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you're doing for the people? What are you doing? Why do you alone sit as judge while all of these people stand around you from morning till evening?" And Moses answered, "Well, because the people come to me to seek God's will. Like, this is my job. This is what I do. This is what God called me to do. Hey, man, that's what I'm created for. Whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and laws." So he's making his case for why he lives and works and leads the way he does. And his father-in-law, he responds. And now this is some of the most wise words that you'll find in the Bible. I think his father-in-law, Jethro, is probably one of the most overlooked and wisest men in the Bible, because here's what he said. He said, "Moses, what you're doing is not good. It's not good. You and these people who come to you will wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You can't handle it alone. You're just one man. You can't keep doing this. You're going to wear yourself out. And when you're all washed up and wore out, you're going to be good for nobody. Not yourself, not for them. You wear yourself out, they're going to move on to the next one. And they're going to wear him out. When he's done, they'll get another one. This ain't good. You can't live this way. You can't keep up this pace indefinitely because you're human. You got to learn to say no. You got to learn to step away. You got to learn to rest. You got to learn not to take the phone call. You got to learn not to respond to the email. It can wait. You see where I'm going? Are you hearing me? And for me, that's so difficult to do. My heart is to pastor, to love people, and to be there with them, to walk through, their difficult times. The problem is, I get so busy and so caught up walking through other people's hard times that I lose sight of my own family, my own wife. They're struggling. And they got nobody to walk with them. That's not right. It's not right. And so my father, not my biological father, but my father said, what you're doing is not good. You need to stop. You need to back away. You need to learn to say no. It's one of the most difficult things I ever had to do. But it's one of the most freeing, refreshing, and healing things. Right? And we were sort of joking with some people as we was leaving after first service, and it's like, don't you ever be gone like that again. Listen, I don't plan to really have like a 3-month break in the future. I might, I don't know. But here's what I can tell you about a sabbatical. 1, it was overdue. 2, it will happen again. Like, just brace for it. Our counselor, when we sat down with him and started telling him, about us and about our life and how we lived life and the ministry and how long we had been at the church, he said, so you've been at the church 10 years. I said, yeah, and I was at another church about 4 or 5 years before that. So all of our married life, we've been doing ministry. And it's been go, 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 go. He said, so in the last 10 years, when was the last time you took an extended break like this? And I was like, looked at him like he had 4 heads. I was like, never. Like, we take a vacation, we go to the beach for a week or 2 or something like that. He said, so you're telling me you've been serving at this church for 10 years and you've never had an extended break? No. He said, shame on you, shame on your church, shame on its leadership. If you've been there 10 years, you're 3 years overdue, because the Bible says you rest every 7 days and you rest every 7 years. You take a sabbatical, you break. Because you're only human. You can't go and go and go without stopping to rest. And like I said, we're going to talk a little more about that. But know your limits. Know your limit. Moses began to embrace his limitations, realizing he couldn't do it all. And his father-in-law suggested, he said, now, here's just what I suggest. Get you some people that you trust. Assign them to groups of thousands, hundreds, tens, 50s, so on and so forth. Let them handle most all the disputes. And in the really tough cases, let them bring them to you. Just spread out the workload. And if you read Moses' story, you'll find out quickly that he listened. He learned a great lesson. And God blessed him for it. God began to turn him from a good leader to a great leader. Second trait that I want to mention that I began to notice in Moses' life was the fact that he was holy. Now you might think, well, wait a minute here. You just said like 5 minutes ago that he killed a man. Now you're going to try to convince me he was holy. Like, you've been gone 12 weeks, and we're not that gullible, right? You're not going to convince us. But the reason there's confusion is because we don't understand what it means to be holy. When we think someone is holy, we automatically attribute it to their actions, their character, what they have done or what they haven't done, their own righteousness. But that's not what holy means. Holy doesn't mean that you're perfect. The fact that, and I'm not trying to minimize murder, I mean, that's just terrible. But the fact that Moses killed a man did not disqualify him from being a holy man. Because, see, the word holy all throughout the Bible simply means special, sacred, set apart. Holy is describing something or someone who has been set aside for God's use, for God's glory. And from Moses' birth, he was drawn out and set aside for God's plan and purpose. He was born during a pretty tumultuous time. The Hebrew people were in slavery, had been that way for like 500 years. And their population in Egypt was growing. And the Pharaoh, he began to sort of feel a threat here. If these people continue to grow in population, at some point there may be so many of them that if they were to decide to band together and rise up against us, we couldn't stop them. And so he came up with a plan to begin to, annihilate an entire generation of Hebrew people. He gave the midwives, the Egyptian midwives, an order. He said, when you go to tend to the birth of a Hebrew child, if it's a girl, you'll let the child live. If it's a boy, you kill the child. Well, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're an Egyptian woman, it doesn't matter if you can't stand Hebrew people. Like, if they disgust you, you're still a woman and a mother. You still have a heart. And you still know, many of them know what it's like to birth and to give life to a child. And they're thinking, I can't do that. I despise these people, but I can't go that far to end the life of an innocent child. Maybe we need to get back to that, right? And so they refused. They didn't do it. They came up with an excuse. They said, sorry, Pharaoh, like, every time we hear that a Hebrew woman is given birth, I mean, these are some strong women. Before we can get there, they've already delivered, and so there's nothing that we can do. So he gives another order to his military. He sends in soldiers to the Hebrew camp, and he says, you collect all of the male children, and you throw them in the Nile River. I mean, just one fell swoop will get rid of all of them. Moses was one of those little boys born during that time. His mother made him like a little basket, put him in it, praying to God that a miracle would happen, shoved him off, and sent him drifting down river. On down river somewhere, Pharaoh's daughter, of all people, was there bathing. She notices, some commotion over in the reed. She hears a child. She goes to discover, here's this little Hebrew child in this basket. No one's around to claim him, right? She could have killed him then. She could have drowned him. She obviously knew what the king's order was. She could have killed him then, but she decided, for some reason, she decided to take him in as her own. She adopted him as her own son and gave him the name Moses. And the name Moses in Hebrew sounds like the word for draw out. To draw out. Even at his birth, God was arranging circumstances to where this child would be drawn out, set aside for his plan and purpose. It's incredible. I mean, if you read verse 23 of Hebrews 11, it says that Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child. He was special. I mean, yeah, he was human just like us, but he was holy. He was special. He was drawn out, called out, set aside. God had a plan for his life. And here's the great thing that you need to understand and discover this morning, that, yeah, Moses was special. God had a great plan for him, but he wasn't any more special than you. And the same God that created and gave life to Moses and had a great plan for him is the same God who created you, gave you life, and has a great plan for you. The same one who set aside Moses and his life for his glory has called you out and set you aside because he wants your life to bring him honor and glory. Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 6 says, "You are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all of the peoples on the face of the earth." Imagine that. To be his people, his treasured possession. And somebody might say, well, you know, that was for the Hebrew people, the Israelites, and that's Old Testament. But listen to what the New Testament says. It confirms that Peter, he wrote this, and now you remember Peter, right? He wasn't a murderer like Moses, but he was an attempted murderer. Close enough, right? When Jesus is getting arrested, there's this one soldier that goes to grab a hold of Jesus, and Peter takes out his sword, and he tries to lob his head off, like take the guy's head off, and I don't know, he ducks or whatever, and he gets his ear. So he's an attempted murderer, but he's a follower of Jesus, and he writes this to followers of Jesus, to the church, and he says, "You are a chosen people." And he's one of these people, chosen. A royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. We're holy people. Just like Moses, God has a plan for us. He set us aside. He set our families aside. He set our church aside. He set our careers so that it can bring glory and honor to him. But to step into that God-sized plan for your life, I mean, one, you got to know that, like, you're human. You're a sinner. You need a Savior. You're not going to do it without him. There are limits in your life. You can't do everything for everybody all the time. But also walk in that knowledge that, you know, I'm holy to God. Not because of anything that I've done, because, listen, I haven't done anything worth pointing out. Not because I've done it, but because what Jesus has done for me. I'm special. And God has a special plan for me. Now, here's what happens when you begin to realize these things. It begins to unlock this God-given, God-created potential that's inside of you to live the life that you never thought imaginable. It's great. But it comes with a danger. So here's the point of the message where, like, the lights are flashing, the sirens are going off, red flags are coming up. This is the point at which we need to say, all right, let's say a word of warning. Because when this potential begins to break loose in your life and things are going great, there's the potential there of being prideful. You know, thinking that I finally did it. Like, I made this happen. I finally broke through, right? I got everything in just the right order. I got the right combination, and I made it happen. What I noticed in Moses' life and in his leadership was that he was humble. Write that down for number 3. He was humble. Week 2, Eric, he took us to Exodus 3, there where Moses and God had this conversation with the burning, in the burning bush. And Moses begins to make all of these excuses. It's like excuse after excuse after excuse for why he couldn't do and be what God had called him and created him to do and be, right? And every message I've ever heard in my entire life on that particular passage has come with a negative viewpoint, because it's just so easy to go to that place in Scripture and say, like, Moses, why are you doing that? We just beat up on him, beat up on Moses for making these excuses. And then we challenge people, right? Don't make these kind of excuses. If God's got a plan in your life, just embrace it, walk in it, love it, that kind of thing. I get that. And that's true. Like, we shouldn't make excuses. We should welcome the plan of God. But let me just sort of flip things around a little bit. And I'm not saying this is how things were, but I'm just saying, like, what if? What if this is the way it was? What if what we call excuses weren't excuses at all? What if they were humble admissions? Like Moses said, I'm not good with words. I'm not a good speaker. What if he was just trying to express to God in the only words that he could drum up his own limitations, his own insecurities, his own inadequacies, his own feelings of not being, the right fit? I'm just trying to be humble and just admit these things. Well, I mean, either way, God wasn't having it, right? He just wasn't having it. And the story works out the same way, but I would challenge you to go back this week to Exodus 3 and read that from a different perspective, because it changes everything. But the outcome is the same. Moses, he submits to the will of God despite the excuses or despite the admissions. He does what God calls him to do. And man, his life just takes off. And he accomplishes some incredible things, working of miracles, leading, thousands upon thousands of people. And what you notice is the entire way, he does it with such humility. I mean, this is one man with some incredible power and authority over all of these people. There were times when the people almost deified him. Like, he would go up and meet with God on the mountain. Like, he would have face-to-face time with God. And on this one event, he came down from the mountain, and his face glowed with the glory of God so brightly, like the people said, you got to put a sheet over that. Like, really, you got to cover that up, because if we look at you, we're afraid we're going to die. They nearly deified him as if he were a god. Now, he could have latched onto that and said, like, y'all, you got that right. Y'all better get y'all junk in order, because I'm the best dad ever, and I'm up in this place. Like, he could have been that way, but he didn't. He walked with humility. He veiled his face. That's not easy to do. If we're going to be Moses-like leaders, we're going to be Moses-like dads, Moses-like moms and husbands and wives, we need to learn some humility and realize that the way up is down. The way to get to the top of the ladder, to get low. Learn some humility. Jesus said it. His stepbrother James said it. God opposes the proud, but he exalts the humble. Number 4, Moses exhibited the quality of being someone who is patient. He's patient. It's often said that patience is one of the most overlooked leadership virtues of all. As if great leaders don't have to wait on anybody or anything. When they say it, it gets done. That's not the case. If you study some of the world's greatest leaders throughout history, they understood that patience was an invaluable characteristic. St. Augustine said that patience is the companion of wisdom. Leonardo da Vinci, the great artist, he said that patience serves as protection against wrongs and as clothes do against the cold. For if you put on more clothes as the cold increases, it has no power to hurt you. The same way, you must grow in patience so that when you meet great wrongs, no matter what the circumstances are, they will then be powerless to vex your mind. Now, like 2017 version. You learn patience, it doesn't matter what circumstance, what situation you find you're in, or how difficult the people that you work with are. You begin to learn patience, they can't mess with you. They can't mess with your mind. Right? They can't get you all frazzled and frustrated. Learn some patience, and if you read the story of Moses, you realize very quickly that he was an extremely patient man. I mean, just the constant grumbling and complaining and arguing and bickering and the rebellion of these people. I mean, it'll drive you crazy. There was this one instance. This sort of proves that Moses wasn't always quite the patient man, but he had to learn to be. Numbers chapter 20, these people were grumbling and complaining and back and forth about there being no water. They're traveling through the desert, through the wilderness, and there's no water. And so God speaks to Moses and he says, listen, I want you to go to this certain rock and I want you to speak to this rock. This is one of his miracles. I want you to speak to this rock, and out of this rock will come enough water for the entire nation of people. Now, that's incredible. There was an event that took place earlier that was somewhat similar. It's in Exodus chapter 17, where God, same situation, people's complaining about no water and about to thirst to death and that kind of thing. And God says, go to this certain rock, take the staff that's in your hand. Remember, he was a shepherd. Take the staff, and I want you to strike this rock. And when you strike the rock, water's going to come out. So very similar situations, but there was one major difference. The first time God said, strike the rock. The second time God says, I'm going to up the ante. You don't have to do anything but speak to it, and this is going to blow people's minds. In his impatience and frustration, Moses disregarded what God said, and he struck the rock. He didn't speak. He struck the rock. He might have cussed it a bit. I don't know. But he struck the rock. Not once, but twice. And I can just see him. I understand it as a leader of people. You get frustrated. You're at wit's end. He struck this rock. Nothing happened. So, man, he laid into it again thinking, I'm going to break this staff over this thing. And, I'm just going to let out. I'm just going to vent here. I mean, the water still came out. But God said, all right, son, that display of impatience and that outburst is going to cost you. Moses wasn't allowed to enter the promised land. I think that was an event that happened early on. See, they spent 40 years out there wandering around in circles. Early on, God had to teach Moses a lesson in patience. Now, he still had to suffer the consequences of that one decision. He didn't get to go in. But he learned the lesson. And if you follow his story, the next 40 years, man, you couldn't have asked for a more patient man. That's what we need. We need some patient Moses-like leaders. Number 5, he was purposeful. Rick Warren would say Moses was a purpose-driven leader. He was faithful. He was persistent in what God called him to do. And you think he had to have been full of purpose and faithful and persistent. He had to persevere. I mean, how many of you have tried leading 1 million or so people through the desert wilderness to a place that they've never seen or been to before, when the whole time nobody's doing anything but grumbling and complaining and whining and wanting to go home? No, nobody? No? Moses did. And he succeeded. Listen, I have trouble going 3 hours to the beach with a 6 and a 3-year-old in the back seat. Amen? Right? That's frustrating. I mean, I want to go home by the time we get there. But could you imagine how many times over the span of 40 years people asked Moses, are we there yet? Like you said just a little further 10 years ago. It's frustrating. It wasn't very long into this journey that these people, we act so much like them, but they had already formed a mob. I mean, they were going to kill him. Like, we're sick of following him. Who does he think he is? They had formed a mob and were complaining. I think they were Baptist deacons, and they had, had a little committee in the back room of the desert somewhere, and they had figured out, what does the Constitution and bylaws say about how we can get rid. It happened, right? They were trying. And here's what they were saying. Now, I'm going to do something here, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but this is for effect, because sometimes you need to feel and you need to experience the Scripture to really understand it. So they were complaining, and this is what they said. And the only way to really understand this and to get the full effect is if you read it as if you were a 80-plus-year-old lady who has one purpose in life, and that is to complain about everything, right? Find fault in everything. And so please excuse me if you're in that age group. I'm not talking about you. But this is what she sounded like. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? You see what I'm saying? Like you felt that, didn't you? You get me? That's what Moses dealt with all the time. You know? It takes a man of great purpose and great faith to lead and stay the course when everybody else wants to quit and go home. You hear that? That's the kind of leader I want to be. Listen, I love the 80-year-old ladies, right? 8 years old to 80. I want to lead them all. But what I've discovered is it takes great purpose. It takes a lot of want to lead and stay the course, to fulfill the mission when everybody else says, I don't know about this. Maybe we just need to go back. Maybe we just need to quit while we're ahead. Maybe we just need to give up. But you see, along with that great purpose, Moses was a man of great passion. This is it. This is where it all comes together. He believed in what he was doing. He believed in what God had called him to, and he believed in the mission. And so it didn't matter what kind of circumstances and what kind of difficulties and what obstacles were going to lie ahead. He believed, and he's like, I'm willing. I'm going to stay the course. And he would stand up in front of those million or so people, and he would say crazy things like, I believe the best is yet to come. Despite the way we feel right now, and despite what's happened over the last few weeks or months or years, I believe the best is ahead. So let's keep moving. Let's forge on. Let's watch God make a way where we think there is no way. And he looks around and he says, who's with me? Who's with me? It takes a lot of passion. It's that passion that drove him to stand in front of Pharaoh 10 different times and demand that those people be freed, knowing that at any point Pharaoh could have off. It's his passion that drove him to believe as he stood on the water's edge of the Red Sea, and he looked out and he thought, well, maybe they're right, but God. He believed that it would be no harder, no more difficult for God to part that sea than it would be to dry up a puddle in the road. So he said, let's go. Forget what's behind, let's go. It was his passion. It's because he believed in the mission. He sent out 12 spies into the land to bring back a report. 10 of them said they couldn't do it. 10 of them said, we can't take that place. It's too big. People are too strong. We might as well turn back and go home. Joshua and Caleb said, Moses, we believe. We believe. We're with you. If it's just the three of us, we'll take it because God's given it to us. And they moved ahead. Do you have passion? See, passion is that fire that burns in you, that can't be quenched by criticism and by circumstances. So whether you're a mom or a dad, a husband, a wife, a student or a teacher or whatever it is, what drives you? If you're not passionate about something, you better get something, because you'll never make it. You'll never make it. What drives me here at this church is that I know that great things are ahead. I know what God is capable of here in this church and in our city. And whether it's 3 of us or 300 or 3,000, I got my mind set to move on, to forge ahead. And all I can say is, who's with me? Let's do this.